My name is Leslie Silverstone, and I'm a volunteer with our PFLAG chapter. And my role is basically to coordinate our speakers for each meeting. I'm always open to ideas about topics or about speakers who you think would be really good educational experiences for our members. I'm very excited about having Robert Shine join us tonight. I actually, it's very odd where I find information about speakers, odd for me anyway. As a Jewish person, I don't really know much about the Catholic community and about the Catholic LGBTQ community. And I happened to read about New Ways Ministry in some newspaper article, and immediately I reached out. And I'm very excited that Robert Shine is going to be with us from New Ways Ministry. It's a Catholic outreach that educates and advocates for equity, inclusion, and justice for LGBTQ plus persons. And he has served there since 2012. Bob has degrees in theology from the Catholic University of America and the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. And we welcome you, Bob, and we're going to learn more about New Ways Ministry and how your organization is supporting and helping Catholic LGBTQ people.
Great. Thank you, Leslie, and thanks to Frank for making the Zoom hybrid happen. It's good to be with you all. As Leslie mentioned, I work with New Ways Ministry, specifically on efforts within the Catholic Church. And when Leslie and I were talking, it was sort of like, well, what could a Catholic ministry say to, people of other faith traditions who may not be Catholic or have no faith tradition? And I said, everyone has to know about what the Catholic Church is doing on LGBTQ stuff in this country, because whether or not you're Catholic, the institutional Catholic Church is affecting all of us who are LGBTQIA plus or allies, family members. So tonight, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And forgive me, I usually don't use notes, but it is 10:15 my time. So I thought I better write down a little bit, at least, to keep me on track. So tonight, I want to basically work in two parts. The first is I'll give a brief presentation on the impact that the institutional Catholic Church has on LGBTQ issues predominantly in the US. And then we'll take a break and stop the recording, and there will be time for questions. And then the second part of this evening, I want to present to you, whether you're Catholic or have Catholic friends or are in conversations with Catholic leaders, how LGBTQ Catholics like myself and our allies have found to a more positive approach that relies on the social justice tradition of our church to approach LGBTQ issues. And even if you're not Catholic, I think that this is helpful because, again, as you'll see, you may come up against Catholic institutions, and knowing how to appeal to them, I think, might be helpful. I don't know what your specific work is in your community, but I know a lot of folks are fighting up against Catholic schools or hospitals, and we'll dive into that. So I'm first going to start by talking about the impact the church has in 5 areas of public life. So that's healthcare, the judicial system, education, political advocacy, and the realities of grassroots Catholics. So I'll start with healthcare. And the first thing to know is that roughly 1 in 6 patient beds in the United States are in a Catholic healthcare system. 4 of the 10 largest healthcare systems in this country are run or Catholic run. And in some more rural areas, you have this patient bed share exceeding 40–50% of beds in a rural county that are administered by a Catholic hospital. Why does this matter? You might ask. Well, Catholic hospitals are governed by what are known as the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services, which are put out by the U.S. Catholic bishops. This document, and it's revised periodically. And basically, the ERDs, as they're known, dictate what services may or may not be provided in a Catholic hospital. So most often, you'll hear about conflicts over this when it comes to things regarding reproductive care, like abortion, birth control. More recently, though, we've seen an uptick in these directives being used to deny gender affirming care to trans non-binary folks, assisted reproductive technologies to queer couples, and just general discrimination facing LGBTQIA patients. I was in a meeting last week and someone mentioned that a trans person came into the ER at a Catholic hospital and the doctors had to check with legal whether they could treat the person at all. So the reality is the directives are not as clear in practice as they are on paper, and that creates a lot of difficulties in getting quality healthcare. The most troubling part about the healthcare side is that oftentimes patients won't even realize they're at a Catholic hospital. So some hospitals, like one named St. Joseph, for instance, you sort of would go, that's a Catholic hospital. But others may not have any indication that they're a Catholic hospital because they've sort of started out as a secular or another faith tradition, ran the hospital, and then a Catholic health system sort of acquired it in a merger. And in Kentucky, for instance, there was somewhere called Jewish Hospital, and it was taken over by a Catholic healthcare system. And now that hospital is dictated by the bishop's healthcare directives that would deny reproductive, gender transition, and other forms of care. My slides are not, sorry about that. This is going to become an increasing problem because, as you may know, there's lots of healthcare mergers happening. More Catholic systems are growing. They're taking in hospitals people don't realize are now, run by a Catholic organization and have these restrictions on care. In some areas, people are challenging these mergers and partnerships. Up in San Francisco, patients and providers protested the merging of University of California Medical Center with a Catholic healthcare system. And there are also lawsuits that some patients have filed for being denied care. But it's important to note, oftentimes the hospitals are winning on religious liberty grounds. Another area, second, would be the courts. So in recent years, under the guise of preserving religious liberty, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and other Catholic leaders have been supporting right-wing impact litigation. So these high-profile cases that are intended to do something regarding policymaking. For instance, you've probably heard of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case that had to do with Colorado anti-discrimination laws. The current case before the Supreme Court, 303 Creative, that deals sort of in a similar way and is seeking a more robust anti-LGBTQIA outcome. And often the US bishops or Catholic organizations have signed on to briefs supporting the anti-queer legal advocates in these cases. In some cases, as with the 2021 case, Fulton v. City of Philadelphia, Catholic organizations are actually leading the charge. In this case, in Fulton, a Catholic social service agency wanted to discriminate against LGBTQ clients when it came to adoption and foster care. And the city of Philadelphia tried to impose a non-discrimination protection. And in a 9-0 ruling, the US Supreme Court said the social service agency can discriminate even while receiving public funding based on its religious values. So this notion of religious liberty is really at the crux of much of what the institutional Catholic leaders are doing. It's sort of their front for attacking LGBTQ rights, for attacking reproductive rights, and other issues that they sort of want to have an impact in policymaking. It's all under religious liberty, which is their one interpretation of how Catholics understand it. Let's just say that. The end goal here is to create such broad religious exemptions that people who wish to discriminate have basically a constitutional right to do so. No matter what area of life we're talking about. That people's sincerely held beliefs are sort of the norm, not any other factors like wanting to protect people from discrimination or create communal justice. Another area that I want to talk about briefly is education. So when I talk about the church and education, folks might immediately think of Catholic schools. And this is a very big part of it. I mean, there are 1.7 million students in elementary and secondary Catholic schools, and there are another 700,000 or so students on Catholic college campuses each year. And so the church is, roughly working with about 2.5 million students in the US each year. And it's important to note, in some countries, even to the north in Canada, in Ireland and other countries where the church actually is publicly funded to run Catholic schools. This is also an issue, but in the US, I'm sort of narrowing in for us tonight. So I mentioned, the thing about Catholic education today, though, is that in many cases, it's non-Catholics who are students, who are the faculty, the staff, the parents. Catholic education does not primarily serve only Catholics anymore, if it ever did, but certainly not today. And so what's happening is many non-Catholics are now being subjected to interpretations of Catholic teaching around gender and sexuality generally, and other issues, and sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. In the sort of 2010s, over 100 LGBTQIA church workers, primarily in Catholic schools, were fired or forced to resign because of their identity or relationship. And those are just the cases that were made public. I know that there are many more. Catholic education is not a monolith. So there are many instances where Catholic schools, educators, administrators are relying on social justice teachings to do better by students. So I don't want to paint it that all Catholic schools are horrible. New Ways Ministry works with many schools to help them improve their support for gender and sexual diverse students. And when you look at Catholic institutions overall, the US Catholic colleges are some of the best places in the church. They're leading the rest of the Catholics towards inclusion. There is another aspect when we talk about the church and education, which has to do with public policy. And this is actually becoming a much bigger thing. So in recent years, well, it's been about 50 years since the concept was introduced, but Catholics on the right have joined efforts to promote school choice or voucher programs that redirect public funding to private schools. You can see why a Catholic school might like this. The big problem right now is that until recently, it was sort of verboten for public funding to go to religious schools, at least directly. There's now an incident in Oklahoma where a virtual Catholic charter school is seeking, a virtual Catholic school is seeking charter school status to directly receive public funding. But the reality is, for these religious schools, whether or not they receive public funding, they're often exempt from non-discrimination laws, things like employment, enrollment, accommodations. So where you may have, good protections for LGBTQIA youth in a school, those can be eliminated at a religious school legally. And this is not just for LGBTQ identities. Non-discrimination protections regarding race, gender, disability, those go out the window too at religious schools. So one of the things I think that is a growing issue to pay attention to is this redirecting public school money to private religious institutions, not just Catholics. There are also evangelical and Jewish and Muslim schools that are trying to push this effort. Another area is political advocacy. And I think folks might have some idea about this, that the institutional Catholic Church is deeply involved with legislative and political advocacy at federal, state, local levels. And, at times I'm very glad that this is on behalf of undocumented immigrants or for expanding social services, but too often church leaders are focusing their public policy efforts to stop LGBTQIA+ rights initiatives. Currently, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is opposing the Equal Rights Amendment because it would extend protections for trans people. They're opposing the Equality Act, claiming it would violate religious liberty. They've opposed Biden administration executive orders to expand LGBTQ protections. On the other hand, during the Trump administration, they supported executive orders that, for instance, barred trans people from who were unhoused from using shelters that aligned with their gender and forcing them to use resources that align with their assigned sex, sort of as a national policy. There are also a lot of activity, and a lot of this goes unnoticed, is happening with these state Catholic conferences or local diocesan lobbyists. You may probably all remember Proposition 8. The Catholic Church, the Knights of Columbus, spent $3-4 million to try to ban marriage equality. And this kind of lobbying is happening right now. I've talked with people in several states where we have these anti-trans bills are being proposed or laws being passed. And in at least one or two of the states, the lobbyist for the Catholic Conference is one of the leads people pushing it and meeting with legislators and trying to use the force of the church to pass some of these horrific laws. So the Catholic Church has nowhere near the power it did in previous decades, I would say, politically, but legislators, government officials are still pretty attuned to what the bishops are saying. So they're able to exert power, even though many Catholics are, walking out entirely. So the fifth area I want to talk about before we break for questions is the view from the Catholic grassroots. Much of what I have presented is about the ways that the institutional Catholic Church negatively impacts LGBTQ+ people in healthcare, education, legislation. There is another equally true story, though, that I want to hold up here. In Catholic theology, if you give me like a little digression, we understand the church as the phrase is the people of God. In other words, when we say church, we mean the community, not just the hierarchy of bishops and clergy. So the second story I want to tell is about the people of God, all the Catholics who are baptized. And in the US and in many parts of the world, Catholics are overwhelmingly supportive of LGBTQ plus rights. So recent data from the Public Religion Research Institute affirms the trend we've seen in recent years. For instance, we see that 86% of Hispanic Catholics and 82% of white Catholics endorse non-discrimination protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity. 75% of Catholics support marriage equality in this country. And these numbers, I've been in this ministry about little over 10 years. These numbers have just like moved so quickly, and each year they move really a bit more. So the statistics bear out that a lot of good is happening. Anecdotally, in my work with New Ways, I also encounter Catholics daily in this country and nationwide, actually, or worldwide, who are actively pursuing equality. So these are LGBTQ plus people and allies who are building parish ministries, working to make schools, participating in civil society efforts, politics. You know, some of the most fervent advocates, as perhaps in secular settings, are the parents and family members of queer and trans folks. Often the children leave and the parents are left behind, and they sort of demand from the church that things be better. So I lift that up to conclude this first portion, because one of the things that we often say working at New Ways is that all of these Catholics who are doing good work are doing it not in spite of our faith, but because of our faith. It's the beliefs we have that compel us to seek equality and justice. How is this possible? That'll be the next part, to talk about a more positive approach. But for now, I realize that I threw a lot at you in a short amount of time. When I was trying to condense this presentation, I thought, oh my gosh, I could do a whole evening on just Catholic healthcare, just Catholic education. So we'll take a moment, and if you have questions, I'd invite you to just sort of jump in. I'll stop the screen share, and I think Frank will stop the recording now. And I want to give you a sense of sort of what is the thinking of pro-equality minded Catholics. And if you come up against a Catholic school or a Catholic hospital, or, you know, a Catholic legislator, sometimes legislators have called and asked us, you know, how do I respond? I'm Catholic. I don't like what my bishop's saying at this hearing. What can I say? So I'm going to give you like a 5-7 minute intro to that, and then point you to resources if you do want to learn more. So let me just start sharing my slides again. So what is the positive Catholic approach to LGBTQIA issues? The first point is that when people say Catholic teaching or Catholic doctrine on, you know, being gay or trans, people often think, oh, that's the condemnatory part that says queer relationships are bad, or you can't be trans. And I'm sort of being hyperbolic in those positions of the church. But it's important to remember that while those teachings are part of it, there's a much broader range of teachings. So it's not just sexual ethics. We're also talking about the Catholic Church has teachings on the mandate for Catholics to stop discrimination against lesbian, gay people, to secure human rights and civil rights, to provide pastoral care, to make sure every LGBTQ plus person is, you know, welcomed into the church and able to access the sacraments. These are also part of the teaching. So it's much broader. Don't let people say the church teaches this on homosexuality, because the church teaches a lot of things on homosexuality, not just the one that everyone seems to know. The second point I'd like to make is the framing that we at New Ways do. We call it justice or sex. That's sort of our pitch. And the point being made is, in the Catholic Church, we have a sexual and gender ethics tradition generally more negative on all things sex and gender, not just for queer folks. And then the social justice tradition. You maybe have heard the term Catholic social teaching. And so the question we say is, okay, when these traditions are both part of being Catholic, but one has to take priority, their intention. And when you approach LGBTQ plus issues, what should you lead with? And we want to make the argument that it's the social justice teachings, so that when Catholics are responding to whether a piece of legislation or a school policy should be implemented, the first questions that should be asked are, does this policy, does this law align with the justice values at the core of our faith tradition? More at the core of being Catholic than any sexual ethics is respecting people's dignity, ensuring everyone can participate in the community, ensuring that, you know, society has the conditions where every person can flourish, making what a preferential option, or, you know, listening first to those who are most marginalized when making decisions. All of these are at the heart of the Catholic faith, far more than you know, prohibitions on certain sexual activity. So that's sort of the shift in thinking that I would encourage you to do. If you take one thing away from this, besides the fact that the Catholic Church is impacting all of us, it's when approaching LGBTQIA plus issues in a Catholic context, lead with social justice, not with, you know, more negative ethics. The Washington State Catholic bishops actually go as far to say that prejudice is worse in the Christian moral tradition than same-gender relationship. That the injustice against a person facing discrimination is far more offensive than, you know, what two people may do in a loving relationship. And this was back in 1983. They put out this statement. More recently, Pope Francis has sort of shifted to this social justice lens. He has supported civil unions for queer couples, and when explaining why, he's leaned on the social justice tradition. That yes, the church may not approve of a same-gender relationship, but these couples exist. This is a reality of our world, and people should be able to find stability and protection to, you know, be able to live their lives well, to protect children that they may have, you know, in terms of the law and society. So you see what the Pope is doing. He's not talking about sex acts. He's saying, no. The first thing we have to consider is, are these people's rights being taken care of? Is their dignity being respected? This is my focus. And this is how he comes to endorse civil unions. I want to that was very quick. The move from sexual gender ethics to social justice. That's just basically the point. However, if you want to know more, I want to point you to New Ways Ministries website, which has a bunch of stuff on it, but it does have pages that go into greater detail about what these positive church teachings are, say on civil rights, or on just employment policies, on speaking positively about trans and non-binary identities. You know, we have tons of more detailed information. I'm giving you a very, very cursory look at things. We also have a blog that's published every day since late 2011 on Catholic LGBTQ plus news. If you want to learn more about what's going on in Catholic healthcare or employment policies at Catholic schools or whatever it is, this is a huge resource. Journalists and theologians and historians have all found it helpful, as have folks doing grassroots work. And finally, I just want to say that if you really want to get into depth about why the Catholics can and should support LGBTQ rights, this book is a Q&A booklet that goes into much greater detail than I ever do in any of these presentations about, what the basis for that is and how to respond to more conservative Catholics and stuff like that. So with that, I guess I'll open it up for a few more questions if they have them, but I want to let you know that New Ways Ministry is always there. If you're ever need a consultation for work you're doing, you're looking for a resource, you have a question about something Catholic and LGBTQ, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for, to help folks work in their communities